Hey, welcome back to Math with Patrick. Today is March 13th. We have problem number 72 from the same Daily Epsilon calendar, and we're going to solve it together. So this number right here, there's my pen. This number right here should be 13 because that's today's date. And it's up to us to figure out why it's the number 13. Now, it would be really silly if I could just cross everything out and be like, hey, look, there's 13. But it doesn't work that way. Let's talk about factorials. In previous videos, I've already talked about them. A factorial is just a product of this number, so 5, and all of the natural numbers below it. So 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1 is the same as 5 factorial. If you do all this multiplication, you're going to get 120. And one maybe interesting feature of factorials is that you could rewrite them using the next lowest factorial. So 5 factorial is just 5 times 4 factorial. So if we take a look at this 14 factorial over here, if you want, you could write it as 14 times 13 factorial. You could even do 14 times 13 times 12 factorial, because you eventually, with that factorial, just count down all the way to 1 with your product there. So let's see if that strategy is going to help us simplify this fraction underneath the square root. Like, we could figure out what 14 factorial is, but these grow really quickly. So 5 factorial is 120. 6 factorial would just be this times 6, so that's 720. And then it grows pretty quickly. So these are pretty large numbers, and I haven't even gotten like halfway yet to that 14 factorial. So instead, I will keep the square root there, and I feel like it would be good if I take out the 14 and then keep the 13 factorial and then subtract 13 factorial over 12 factorial. Now I can't just cancel these out. Algebra doesn't work that way, but I can do some factoring. So both the first and the second term have this 13 factorial in it, and I can factor 13 factorial out front, and then I get a 14 minus 1. You could imagine distributing this back in, and the first term is going to be 14 times 13 factorial, which is right here. And the second term will just be minus 13 factorial, because 1 times anything doesn't really change it. So I decided to factor out a 13 factorial, and I still have a 12 factorial on the bottom. So, okay, let's simplify that 14 minus 1. That's just a 13. And let's talk a little bit about how you can simplify factorial division. So using some smaller numbers, if I have like 5 factorial over 3 factorial, I could rewrite the numerator as 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. And the denominator is 3 times 2 times 1, and these cancel out. So I'm only left with 5 times 4, or 20. Maybe you're wondering, wait, isn't there like a nothing, like a 0 on the bottom? I guess you could imagine me like multiplying this by 1. Again, times 1 does nothing. And so instead of a 0 on the bottom, I should have a 1. And ultimately, 20 over 1 is still just 20. What I wanted to show here, though, is that when you divide factorials, you can get some nice cancellations going. In this case, 5 factorial divided by 3 factorial is just the first two numbers here, 5 times 4. And the same thing happens with that 13 factorial and 12 factorial in our problem. If I take a little aside right here, I can rewrite this 13 factorial as 13 times 12 factorial. There's the 12 factorial on the bottom. And just like how it worked with that other example, all those factors are going to cancel out with each other. So I'm just left with the square root of 13 and then times this 13. So this one is still going to show up right here, times 13. Now with square roots, this is just asking what times what gives me the number underneath the square root sign. Like, I could, multiply 13 and 13 together, and that's 169. But I don't really even need to do that, because just the meaning of square roots, I'm trying to find what number times itself gives me this, and it's already written out for me. The square root of 13 times 13 is just 13. And there we go. All done. That's today's date. And by working through the algebra of factorials, we can show that this number is just 13. So all done. Thanks for coming along as always, and I'll see you tomorrow. All right, bye-bye.